doing SWIFT financial transactions out of the bank at the same time that the IT staff was trying to fight this ransomware attack on the front end. So it's a two-pronged attack, and we have to be aware of that.
Wow. So ransomware going through the roof, exponential increase. Got to have the right policies and procedures that HPE Pointnext can help us with. Got to have the ability to restore and recover. It sounds like, Scott, you've got some products that can help us do that. And you don't see any end in this trend.
No, I think it's going to only continue to get. I mean, one unclassified report said that there are now over 200 different groups doing cyber attacks against the United States and against corporations within the United States. That number is only going to increase because they still see us somewhat as a soft underbelly. The United States has been slow in many cases to adopt cybersecurity regulation and guidelines. This is my crusade, and this is actually for the FBI, and we're trying to get much better about it. We have to protect ourselves. We have to get armored up.
So you brought up a good point. That's another trend that's on the slide here, and that's the regulatory impact. And we just saw, of course, and everybody is aware of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, went into effect. And I think we saw a couple of lawsuits in the billions of dollars the day after that regulation went into effect. So we've got to make sure, because all companies in the EU have to comply with that. Any other companies worldwide doing business with companies in the EU have got to comply with that. And do we see actually some of those regulations coming out? But what's the?
Well, I don't think you're going to see GDPR in the United States from a federal standpoint. I don't see that. But we are seeing some states in the United States starting to consider implementing the same type of GDPR here. Now, so how does that change your data, right? So now you can't just maintain data on EU citizens and US citizens. You may have to maintain it on New York citizens and other US citizens as well. And I think that really what we're going to have to get down to is that the GDPR will probably become much more unique across all the systems. I just don't see it different. But one thing we've seen also is we had some major losses of private intellectual information, privacy information in the last couple of years. We're also seeing some companies not be quite completely forthcoming about cyber events to their shareholders. And that has the SEC very concerned. And the SEC has started to indicate that they may take some action. And I think it was Warren Buffett made a statement that said, right now, where cybersecurity is the same place that accounting was prior to Enron. And prior to Enron, accountants could do whatever they wanted in the books, as long as they didn't break the law, and as long as the shareholders were cool with it. Well, I think that the SEC is actually now saying that there's a requirement to tell your shareholders about cyber events. And that takes IT out of, that takes cyber events out of IT and puts them into the board of directors. And the board of directors now are seeing a lot more boards and executive management being very concerned about cyber events and how they're being reported up-channel.
Wow, so we've got maybe a pre-Enron type situation with cybersecurity events, reporting potentially to shareholders, SEC potentially getting involved with some of the trends that you see. Certainly the CEOs we talked to, it's their worst nightmare is a cybersecurity breach, and now we're thinking about some penalties and maybe some regulatory things like GDPR potentially coming our way. So Lois, GDPR is big on everybody's minds. It's huge. It's hard, very onerous to implement. Not a lot of really technical guidelines on how to do it within the GDPR. Some suggestions, but what's the Pointnext perspective on this? How do you help our customers?
Well, a lot of our customers have already started down that GDPR path, or should have, especially if they're in Europe. But we really work with them where they're at. Up front, the one thing you have to do is a risk assessment. You have to get legal counsel to make sure that you've identified the right PII information. But what we do is come in behind that and then help you determine, okay, I have this PII information. Where is it? We've actually got some services where we can go out and do some data profiling. Where is that data sitting in your infrastructure? We can then help you do some data mapping. And then beyond that, then we do have some analysis services that we go and we do security as well as some privacy practices assessment based upon the ISO standards. And ISO has been recognized by GDPR saying that if you do meet ISO 27001 and 002, you're going to be far down the road in meeting GDPR compliance because it's not as prescriptive as you were saying what exactly you have to do. But ISO is really, and NIST, it's also cross-mapped to NIST. If you're doing these things, then you're going to be in a good position. So we help to identify those gaps and come up with ways to close those gaps and work with customers. And another thing that we're getting into is, you may, I don't know if you've heard the term, but when we go back to the word data again, everything is data driven. You've got to really look at a data-centric view of security. So where is that data going? And do you have sticky security that's staying with that data wherever it's going in the organization? And there's some technologies around doing that, and that's the kind of thing that we can help with. But we're focused on helping to secure and protect that data as well. And just one other comment based upon, why are some customers moving into GDPR that maybe you wouldn't think they have to? It's because of competitive advantage. Because what happens is, even though you may be, you have to do GDPR compliance because you have EU citizens, you may have a localized payroll company who is handling your PII information, but they're not GDPR compliant. So we've seen a lot of this going on in Point Next in talking to customers where they're evaluating their business partners as to whether they're GDPR compliant. And even customers come to HPE, are you GDPR compliant, before they want to do with us. And we do have a good program around that, but I just thought that was...
Well, and Lois brings up a good point also, is where's your data? I mean, it's a simple question, but it's kind of, when we come out and do an investigation, that's one of the questions I ask. Where is your data? And the scratching the head is never a good sign. But you've got to know, if you're responsible for that data, you've got to know where it's at. And I think that's one thing about GDPR is every company needs to have a much better handle about where is your data actually kept. If it's in the cloud, where in the cloud? Because if you're telling me this data is really, really, really important, do you have control of it? Do you have control over your own data? If you don't, maybe there's another issue there.
So if it's in the public cloud, you've talked to companies not sure where their data is.
Well, they didn't. They knew they had hired cloud services, but they weren't necessarily sure where that data was stored in the cloud because it wasn't written into the contract.
Right. Okay. Now you're in a federal agency. We saw the executive order come out from the White House actually on making sure that all federal agencies follow the NIST guidelines for deploying cybersecurity protection. Scott, I know we've got some NIST controls on our hardware and even software, right? So we've heard about the services, and it sounds like some good stuff there, but from the hardware and infrastructure, how do we help customers with all these regulatory issues?
Yeah, great question. And particularly as all these sophistications of attacks grow, I'm fascinated by the idea of a decoy over here, an attack on the back end. Cyber criminals are really gaining a lot of creativity in their approaches here. But what I would say, Bob, to your question and point about GDPR and NIST and federal statutes and such, these are all manifestations of accountabilities. It's the organizations that they're accountable to represent what they're doing in their good faith efforts to protect data, to protect access to areas and or data that criminals certainly, or even other non-criminals should not have access to.
Right.
And so GDPR represents that, and everybody's accountable to somewhere, a board of directors, a shareholder, or whatnot. And so, although we have government-like NIST controls, the 800-53 statutes that are voluminous in the various regulations that they put forward, it's worthy en route to your planning and assessment of even glancing through that stuff and understanding the tips that get revealed in those statutes and how they might apply to your organization. And at the highest level, like in the EU and the GDPR, it's that accountability. It's showing the good faith of what you did to protect your customers' data. So we're a big fan, of course, of deploying the world's most secure infrastructure, right? That's a show of good faith that helps protect against the otherwise penalties that can ensue by virtue of the potentials of folks getting access to data they shouldn't have.
Because it also shows that security built in rather than bolted on, which is required by the GDPR, built in, not bolted on after the fact, as well as using state-of-the-art technology. There's some verbiage in there too. So certainly you qualify for both of those as part of the GDPR, and then the third one would be your NIST controls and showing a good faith effort to the regulators. So if they're doing that, and then James, as some of these requirements come here to the U.S.-based companies, it seems like that would also show some steps or some strides in the right direction for meeting regulations.
It seems like cybersecurity has to be a constant process. I mean, we can't, it's not like something where you can put it out there and then hope it's going to stay good for 3 years. Because the way the attack surface is going, this is a constant process that has to be, your data changes, your business models might change a little bit, technology's changing, and so it has to be a continually moving target. And that's one thing, I mean, criminals are looking for the easiest target. If you're moving just even a little bit sometimes, they're going to look for somebody that's not moving as fast as you are.
Sure. So you've got to be one step ahead of cyber criminals, and so we hope to do that. Great. Okay, well, the fourth element, the trend that the FBI is seeing that we want to talk to a little bit is this human element. Of course, this always fascinates me because we know statistically that over half of the breaches into our customers' infrastructure data centers take place inside the firewall. And a lot of that's the human element where employees are innocently enough clicking on the wrong links, or if you leave a box of USB sticks outside the parking garage, one of them's going to make its way into the office there. So talk a little bit about what you guys at the Bureau are seeing as part of these human element trends.
Well, statistically, 95% of the attacks are going to start off with some sort of social engineering. I mean, they're going to try to see if they can get somebody in your network to click. And it starts off with phishing. So are you testing that? Are you working on a security assessment of your people? Are you looking at, do you have one person who continues to fail all of their phishing tests? This is probably a person that is a security vulnerability to your company. Statistics show 80% of your people will never click on a link. They're disciplined enough, they're not going to be your bad people. But there's 4% that will click on everything that comes through that into their email. And so you have to identify those folks. You have to identify them as soon as you can. And sometimes I know some companies that if you fail a phishing test, you're fired. They've taken a very hard line about phishing as a security vulnerability. So that's part of it as well. But then the other side of social engineering we're starting to see, which is kind of an interesting, fascinates me, is we call it pretexting. These are ongoing communications between a bad person and your HR or your finance department. And what they're doing is they're creating a relationship, and they're actually continuing as an online email conversation back and forth. And eventually they're going to make a purchase. And they're going to make a purchase from you, and you're going to think it's a great relationship, and it's going to fall apart.
So we've seen some of those, I think. I mean, I've seen them. We're from it. I've got some money at the base of Uganda, and I want to have some place to deposit.
Yeah, or even the old mindset of this is Joe from finance, and we've got a really important client that I need to send money to. Please send $110,000 to this routing number and this account number. And it happens. It happens a lot. And so we tell companies email should not be your primary form of communication. It can't be. But part of that's going to come down to security assessments, which I think Lois has talked about, and it's going to come down to penetration testing of the network. Have you tested your network? Have you had a third party come in and verify that your network isn't vulnerable to something very common, a very low level attack? It's really important.
Having a third party come in and do the pen. Do we do that, Lois?
Yes, actually. We do offer penetration testing services, and we actually use a partner of ours called Synac. They're a pathfinder that we partner, and you may have seen some information about that on the floor. But what they do is crowdsource penetration testing, and these are vetted people that are around the world, and all they do every day is pen testing. And there's hundreds of those guys. I don't know if there's hundreds, but it's about 100 that are able to go out and really look and do your penetration testing. So not only we can be a third party, but we have some even more third parties behind us in our crowdsourcing model.
But now, James, you mentioned the email. All of us are in an email-centric culture here. Is this just a one email and you just know not to respond to that one, and then the next day you get a different email, or is this a relationship that these criminals are trying to establish?
There's two parts of it. I mean, the phishing typically is a one-shot. Right? They're just trying to get you to click on something. The pre-texting, though, is a constant conversation. And so the only way you can really break that is you need to start doing some role-playing with your HR people or role-playing with your finance people and see if you can't get them to get into a conversation with you about something financial. So some companies are actually starting to do that as well.
Okay. Most other things you want?
Yeah, well, one of the big important things about the human element here is, and most companies do this, but there's a lot that don't, is you really need to have a very strong educational program about security awareness. That needs to be done on a very regular basis. We have ours within HPE. We actually also have through our education services that we can sell to you if you would like an ongoing training program. And, you know, as we were talking about earlier, once you've trained these people, you need to continuously keep this conversation going. You can do things that are like, you know, win awards by, you know, doing certain things or finding certain things that maybe you've planted just to see it, to test it out. You kind of, decoys. And you really what you're doing is you're vulnerability testing your people, your humans, and so that's really important to continue to do that. Another thing just around the human element is this whole concept of user behavior and entity analytics, UEBA, which is we have a product with Ariba, the Introspect, which you can determine based on certain behaviors. Let's say you have a payroll department and all of a sudden you notice that somebody is doing something unusual that is really not normal for that type of job. It could be a flag that, hey, I need to take a look and see what's going on there. You know, if it's consistent or there's totally just different behavior that doesn't make any sense. So that's an important thing to do. And then one other thing related to the human element that I have a passion about is I think that culturally we have somehow put security at the end. A lot of times, instead of when we're doing transformation projects within hybrid IT and all this, any of these new things that we do, and I hear this from CISOs all the time. We are brought in too far down the road, and then we have to go back and try to retrofit the security in. So that build it in up front, which is, you know, a theme that we're also talking about, is you need to bring the security guys in up front in your projects. And that's also what we're doing with Endpoint Next, is really making sure security is built in up front as we do these transformation projects.
And part of it isn't even just from a data standpoint. One penetration testing company I know also does physical
Right.
testing. And they have a woman on their staff who is very pretty, and they're able to walk her into most data centers because she will walk in there and just talk her way in. And so it's very interesting how human nature has sort of this way of sometimes being, you know, manipulated. Is really what it comes down to, is how easily manipulated are your people, you know, by something like that. We talk about throwing USB sticks in the parking lot. And some statistics will show that if I throw USB sticks out in your parking lot, 3% of them will end up in your corporate network. And then put on back on that, if I put corporate payroll on those USB sticks and throw them in the parking lot,
All of them make it in.
the number by statistically it doubles. So we've got to have an understanding that those are the kind of things culturally that how manipulated can I, and how much can I get away with?
Yeah, this is really related to social engineering.
Right.
And so the things that you examples of trying to get through doors and trying to another one that we're brought in sometimes to help with this as well is call the help desk.
Yes.
And tell them, I've lost my password, please, you know, help me with this. And you know, inevitably, you know, that will happen. The help desk will give out the password and help them get it.
But you brought up passwords, which I think is kind of the last part of this, is that 80% of our passwords are easily breakable. And it's sad when we get down to how easy that is. Cisco ran a report on online routers and found that 70% of routers still had default passwords and user accounts in those. Our servers, there's a number of times we've run into attacks where servers have had admin as an account and password, you know, coupling. We can't do that. Part of security is going to come down to how good is your password, you know, security.
But and somehow to keep the factory default passwords, I think
Exactly.
But Scott, we don't let them do that with ours.
We don't let them do that. We definitely create default passwords that are very complex, which is very important as opposed to the guessable kind.
Right.
And then we also have facilitation, and really it's the responsibility of an infrastructure provider to facilitate the problem of the human element, which otherwise technology doesn't always, reach into the minds of human beings, if you will. And so we really want to do that, and we do that. We facilitate the convenience for establishing policy about frequency of password change, a very big attack surface, frankly, passwords are. As well as, we also would suggest the idea of which ones of my employees in my IT shop have authorization to access what systems and what data, culling those lists, performing, the weeding out of those that no longer have a need to know accesses, and those things are the kinds of policies that our infrastructure seeks to make conducive, such that you can establish that policy and eliminate some of that human element that occurs. I would say one thing, and James, you and I have talked about this before, but back in the day, roughly a decade and a half ago, the big focus was on the bad guys on the outside trying to get in. Firewalls were all the subject that we would talk about in technology and in IT. And nowadays, inadvertently and innocently, or worse, overtly, those on the inside can cause breaches as well, whether it's plugging a USB stick that I didn't realize where its origin was from, or whether it be passwords that are a little bit more knowable if you know me, so to speak. And all that human element is now on the inside that has to be protected against, both overtly and inadvertently. And so I would just say, on the subject of human elements, be aware of all of these things, and that it's kind of transcended from only outside to outside and inside in today's world.
Perfect. Okay. That's great. Why don't we do this as we start to wrap up a little bit? Let's talk about the HPE Secure Compute Lifecycle, because we allude a little bit to the supply chain that's so important. James, you talked about that, and getting to products before they actually get to our customers' location, so we have to provide some protection. I think, Scott, between you and Lois, you could probably talk to this easy 6-step process that covers the entire cradle-to-grave aspect of our products.
Yeah, right. Great topic. We think this way all the time inside of HP, particularly in the product design areas. Manifest in our current product lines, our Gen 10 family of servers, for example. From the moment the server is being assembled to the time it reaches the customer, no opportunity for bad firmware to find its way in and have breaches associated with that. And then once it's on the customer premise, there's no opportunity to flash bad firmware that's not authenticated as the genuine firmware to be running on that device itself. And then if for some reason, which would elude me, but as James says, you're never quite done with security. It's an ongoing pursuit. It's never ending, and we'll continue to hold that thesis in our product designs. But we have runtime checks such that while you're in flight, the day in the life of the server, serving up data or whatever business-related function it's doing for you, we make sure that you're authentically the right set of underpinnings that your OS is running on top of and your application on top of that. So that brings us through the first couple of boxes here. And maybe Lois, you'd like to speak to the employees.
Yeah, well, the employees, as we've talked quite a bit about, is that human element, and having that ongoing security awareness training is essential. It needs to be part of your program, and as part of your threat management program to do continuous monitoring to some of those plantings, some of those ideas that we gave around social engineering, and last but not least, the user and entity behavior analytics is a really good way to do that.
And of course, next up is when you're running your system, and as James mentioned, do you know where your data is? Well, hopefully the answer to that is yes. And also, do you know who's got access to that data? And data at rest is well suited to be encrypted. And in our product lines, we have the ability to encrypt data at rest that are sitting on hard drives or solid state types of media here, whether it be standalone storage or storage inside a server machine itself, whether whether it be software-defined storage as well.
Right.
Those are the kinds of things that we'd expect, the infrastructure to facilitate you with protection such that data at rest can be encrypted. So in the event of a breach, that data is not useful to the nefarious, the bad guys that might find otherwise a reason to hold it hostage.
Yeah, the next is accelerate regulatory compliance. And you know what? Compliance is not a bad thing. GDPR is not a bad thing, except you have to, I know it seems bad, but it's actually a way to really look at what you've done over all these years and try to look at that data. There may be ways to optimize data, look at new ways to use the data. It's really a good way to reorganize what you're doing. So there's actually been a lot of articles around, GDPR is actually a good thing. So try to look at it in the positive light. And then finally, we talk about the data from creation to destruction, making sure that you safely dispose of the data if you are going to retire that data from maybe not using it anymore, or maybe you want to reuse that on tape or disk. And we do have some services around this, our data sanitization services that can help you with this as well.
Make sure that data is never resurrected again, right? Because
That's
enterprise
right.
hacker can turn ones to zeros back to one and
That's
resurrect the data.
Mm-hmm.
Not with your services they can't do. Fantastic. Okay, so as a wrap up, before we leave, about 5 minutes for a few questions. We've got a holistic offering here, Lois. You can talk to this. I know, Scott, you've got our products are just fantastic. And then James will end with you on what you think about these trends versus how we're addressing all of this.
Yeah. So really, this is just a framework. Everything we've been talking about, all of these aspects of protecting the data, securing the infrastructure, the apps, the access, detection, recovery, all of these things you have to do for security no matter what. It's like a big list of ingredients that you have to do for security, but a lot of times it's difficult to understand how do I apply that into my environment, how do I apply it into hybrid IT, to the edge, to the cloud. And that's really our approach, is to make sure that we are putting security into those environments, whether that be at the infrastructure level, all the way up through the policy level, the operations, cyber operations, that we're looking at it from security from the inside out, not the outside in.
Fantastic. And Scott, we've got to defeat these cyber criminals before they attack, and certainly before they do any damage, because it sounds like from the FBI here, it's inevitable there's going to be a penetration at some point in time, but we've got the products to detect and recover from that.
Absolutely. As this slide says, and as our engineering communities and our product design and product management organizations chant the protect, detect, recover, restore, on everything we do on the security side, every new product, every aspect is got a thread of that rolling through it here. And as James mentioned, this isn't kind of a once and done kind of deal. It's a continuous behavior that has to be instilled. It is inside of our product sides of the house where we deliver infrastructure. It's certainly instilled in our services side of the house as we advise customers and render services to them. And you'll see us continue to do that and drive forward here with certainly emphasis on the protect and the detect. We just don't want our customers to be in the situation where they have this unfortunate event of an attack that's occurred to you. So we have our commitment that we're focused on that inside of HPE.
Great. And James, and just last question back to you. So you're with a federal agency here, and you're certainly not allowed, I don't think, to come out and make a recommendation of a server manufacturer IT infrastructure firm, but we've listened to the trends, and then you